You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. This weekend, Virtuosi Concerts closes out their 2021-22 season with violinist Christina Bouey and pianist Pierre-André Doucet. Both originally from the East Coast, the duo will perform in 4 stops across the Manitoba prairie, including the Virtuosi Concert on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Ahead of that, both Christina and Pierre-André have joined me. Welcome to Classic 107, both.
Thank you, Simon.
Well, so excited to have you here. And you two were supposed to be here a little while ago to open the 2022 portion of this Virtuosi Concert season back in January. Instead, you closed things out the end of this season. It certainly has been quite the time making it here, hasn't it, Christina?
Definitely. I'm just glad it's going to be better weather, though, than it was in January.
Well, that's exactly it, right? I mean, the Manitoba thing is it's going to be a lot warmer than it would have been in January. And Pierre-André, I know that you've performed here in Manitoba before in the E-grade competition, both as a soloist and as a collaborator, working with the 2017 winner, Alexandra Smither. When's the last time you were in Winnipeg performing?
I believe it was in Winnipeg proper. I'm not sure I've actually ever given a performance there, but the last time I played in Manitoba would have been in 2017 with Ali. Actually, no, Tina, we did the Manitoba Showcase.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Gimli, Manitoba in 2019 and listened to some bops on the way there and back. And we were there for probably 24 hours. So that's the last time I was in Manitoba.
Hit the Chinese buffet.
We did.
Okay, so you're seeing all the stops. You spent time in Gimli, of course, Egray, in Brandon, and you're going to be doing a little tour through southern Manitoba in Killarney and in Pinawa and also over in Minnedosa. But you haven't performed in Winnipeg before. Christina, have you performed in the Manitoba capital?
No. I'm excited.
That is so fascinating and yeah, very exciting. Yeah. Though I understand you have a connection to the city. Is that right in the family?
Yeah. Well, my grandfather was from Winnipeg. So I've always felt a weird connection whenever I've flown in through Winnipeg, because I also did the E-grade competition. And so every time I just fly into Winnipeg, I'm like, I kind of know this place somehow, but it's nice.
Well, very, very excited to finally have you in town. You're both originally from the East Coast. You both found success there as young artists. I am curious, it sort of makes sense that you would perform together, but it wasn't originally your idea to do so. Whose was it, Pierre-André?
So Tina and I met about 15 years ago at the National Music Festival, which was actually held in Moncton that year. And we had connected, but we weren't particularly close at that moment and didn't end up playing together. And we both applied to debut Atlantic to tour as soloists. And rather than take us both, they decided, well, why don't we offer them to tour as a pair? And we both accepted because we're both very easygoing and willing to make new musical discoveries and new connections. And it was love at first note. Honestly, I think the first thing we read together was the Debussy Sonata, which is on this program this weekend. And it was such a straightforward, not like unbothered read through of it. Both of us were like, oh, okay, we have exactly the same conception of this piece. And then that just kept happening and happening and happening over and over again anytime we'd bring a new rep together. So we had a great tour. We did 21 days, I think, in the Atlantic provinces, and then since then we've played several gigs together, and here we are.
I mean, I think it's really remarkable because there's no guarantee that would work. Like, it's great that there was love at first note, but it might make sense on paper. Here's a really talented violinist. Here's a really talented pianist. Let's put them together and see what happens over 21 days doing debut Atlantic. But Christina, what do you think makes this partnership so special? You've been at this for 15 years performing together.
Yeah. Well, we haven't been performing for 15 years together, but
since that first happened. Yeah.
We've been playing together since 2017.
Right.
But what is so special about Pierre is that he just knows exactly, how I want to phrase things. He never plays too loud or covers me, which, it's really, really valuable. People underestimate, not having to tell pianists to play softer. So I really appreciate that because my arms aren't like super tired on tour with Pierre, which is great. It keeps me healthier. But just really just our connection and our musicality, the way it aligns, that's really special. And you don't find that with partners often. So that's definitely the best part about Pierre. And also he's such a great person to tour with. He's so easygoing.
I bet. What I find great about Tina, if we're going to be pumping each other up here, which we often do while we're on tour, is that both of Tina's parents are singers, and Tina was also trained as a pianist and as a singer. And I work a lot with singers, and so my musical instincts are very much related to breath, to text, to phrases. And Tina plays the violin like a singer, and I mean that in such a complimentary way, in that she has such an organic and narratively focused way of phrasing. So it's actually, my job is super easy because we just sit down and tell a story together. You know, there's nothing more complicated than that. It's just us sitting down and saying like, oh, and then this, and here's the journey. And that's what's great about touring with Tina.
Well, I'm so excited to hear more about what it is exactly that you'll be sharing with us when you make it to the Manitoba capital. If you're just tuning in, my name is Simon Rusnak. You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107, and I'm chatting with violinist Christina Bouey and pianist Pierre-André Doucet, who perform in the last concert of the Virtuosi Concert season. It is an especially diverse program you've put together here. Just looking at it on the Virtuosi website, there's some names that we know well in the classical music world: Poulenc, Debussy, Ravel, Messiaen, dudes that have been a quintessential part of the French tradition for decades upon decades. But you two both consciously make a point of going beyond the well-trodden path. Pierre-André, tell us why that's important to you as a performer, as a curator of music, and then who else is on this Virtuosi program titled Present Impressions?
Right. So actually, I just finished an 11-day stint running a literary festival here in Moncton, and I was chatting with some translators last night, and we were comparing our jobs as classical music performers and their jobs as translators. And you know, the classical music world has been for a very long time very white, very male, and very hermetic and closed off to the rest of the world. And it's our responsibility, given that heritage and how long the pipeline is, to get new performers, to get new music out. It's our responsibility in the meantime, and mine especially as a white male, to find other voices and to lift those up, until such a time comes when you know, there's a diversity of voices, and that's a given. So I think it's really important for us as performers to seek out underrepresented voices, to go find composers from 100 years back who were forgotten, many women such as Lily Boulanger. Mm-hmm. And then our program also includes works by Jessie Montgomery, whom Tina will probably be able to speak a little bit more about, and Nicole Lisée, who we commissioned a new piece from for this tour. And to me, that's extremely valuable and extremely important to the work that we do, because our job as performers is to find this cool music and to bring it to audience and say, hey, this is cool music, right? So it's a really thrilling and important part of my job to seek out those voices.
I definitely want to get to the Jessie Montgomery and the Nicole Lisée, but just you mentioned Lily Boulanger. How does she fit into this? I mean, the Boulanger name, of course, very familiar. Nadia Boulanger, her sister, anybody who was anyone, it seemed, especially Americans, went over to study with her. Mm-hmm. Copeland and Bernstein and Carter and Glass. Tell us a little bit about this Lily Boulanger work and how it fits into the Present Impressions program.
Right. Well, I mean, Nadia, as you say, taught everyone, including actually my former prof here in Moncton, who studied with her for a few years. Yes. And you know, she was a formidable woman, the first woman to conduct an American orchestra. She was a composer, a pedagogue, and a performer. And throughout her life, she said that her younger sister Lily was by far the most talented of the two. And she actually stopped composing, Nadia, at some point, because she was like, you know what, Lily was better at this, and I don't want to do this anymore. I have other things that I can do. And so Lily tragically died in her mid-20s, in the late 1910s. and so we never really got to see how her voice would develop. And I have a little spiel about this in the concert itself, but Lily was actually the first woman to win the Prix de Rome, which was the most important compositional prize in the world, and came with a residency, and was extremely sought after. And the year that she won, the composer who placed second was a composer who was 30 years her senior, much more well established, and his name was Claude Debussy. So it just goes to show, like, fancy that.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really interesting to play works, and the works that we have by Debussy on the program are some late works, especially the violin sonata, which is one of the last things he wrote. And so to have that and works by Lily Boulanger on the same program sort of allows us to see, like, where the ethos was at the time, what the style was at the time, and then to sort of allow ourselves to imagine, what if she had lived another 60 years? She would have lived into the 1970s, the 1980s. What kind of, like, whack things could she have been doing, and what kind of a force could she have been in classical music had she stayed with us?
Yeah, it really, really sort of leaves you wondering, right? And I think what's really neat about this program is that, in a way, not directly, but in a way, it sort of answers the question, because then we sort of skip forward 100 years into the present century, and there's music by composers like Jessie Montgomery, who we keep hearing her music in Winnipeg. Not too long ago, just a couple of weekends ago, the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra performed some of her music. We've heard it plenty of times in the Winnipeg New Music Festival. Christina, you know Jessie personally, is that right?
Yeah, I do. I met her years ago. I don't even remember how long ago at this point, at a quartet festival, at the Robert Mann Quartet Institute, actually, because I was there with my old quartet that I used to be in, and she was also there with her quartet, which she used to be in as well. So we connected on that level of both, playing in quartets, and obviously her compositional career took her in a different direction, and she has such an affinity for it, and she's amazing. So yeah, I mean, I really wanted to include this piece I called Peace. I think it's so beautiful. I know that she wrote it during the COVID-19 pandemic, and her mother passed away during this time as well. So it was a really hard time for her, and I think she just wanted to write something to signify, something more calming and tranquility. And so there's something about that piece. It really does do that, and it does have her style, her own personal style. So it's not like just every other beautiful piece that you've heard. And so I'm really excited to share that with the audience. I know it's getting played a lot now. And this other piece by Nicole Lizet, that she wrote it specifically for us. We were honored that she did, and it's so neat. It's called Summer's Last Gasp, and you can really hear the summer changing into autumn in the piece. When Pierre and I first debuted the piece in January, we were getting all of these comments from people private messaging us on Instagram saying, "Oh, I heard this, in the piece, and I heard, like all the bugs flying around and like the wind," and they were so excited that they just wanted to contact us to share it. And I actually play for a good part of the piece on a parchment paper bow. So it's a violin bow made out of parchment paper. So of course it has a very different sound. And Pierre also gets to show off his paper parchment skills on the piano as well.
Wow.
I worked on them very hard.
Well, yeah, I feel like maybe as a writer, you bring a certain depth to that too, really embracing parchment paper in a certain way. But, I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I mean, you mentioned the Nicole Lizet work that was specifically written for the two of you. I mean, that in and of itself is really fascinating. But Lizet explores such a fascinating sound world, almost like a musical architect or an engineer building these soundscapes. And you talk about how this work does that. I'm also
Mhm.
curious because this is, she a contemporary composer, but Christina, you play on a very old violin and a very special violin, right?
Yes, I do. I play on the 1728 Artaud Stradivarius, generously on loan from the Juilliard School.
Okay, so it's a Strad. There's not a lot of those around in the world. I'm curious. I mean, like, this is obviously just a random thought, but how do you think Stradivarius would feel about the soundscapes that you create on his instrument in the present age? How do you think that that overlaps playing with that idea of sort of present impressionism again?
I I mean, I just have to think that he would have loved it because he was, one of the first violin makers besides Amati to
Mhm.
really modernize the way violins are built. And he completely changed it for everybody. I mean, the way he built the bodies of the instrument, the way he carved the epaules, um, just really meticulous work. And the way he made his violins, it just from that point on sounded different. And to this day, people still can't replicate it. So it's I think he was a trendsetter, and I think he was just so ahead of his time, honestly.
And I think that that spirit is embraced in this music of Nicole Lizet, in the program that the two of you have put together. Christina, Pierre-André, thanks for taking the time to chat with me at Classic 107 today.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having us.
having us.